Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're doing another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we're looking at the best performing decks on the MTG Magic Arena ladder. This particular video will be for traditional standard best of three, MTG standard, whatever you want to call it. And we are looking through a number of sources. We're going to be looking the week of March 7th through to the 14th. And we're going to be looking at kind of all the high performing decks. So if you want to get to mythic rank, if you just want to ladder up, if you just want like a general ladder deck, the idea, stuff like that, you want to play in a tournament, whatever it is, these are some deck ideas for you. A lot of the standard RCs are currently, or a lot of the RCs are currently standard. So a lot more deck stats are coming out. So like I said, we're getting the source of data from UntapedGG, which you see on the screen, which tracks win rate data for ladder matches. And so we get an aggregation here. The link will be in the video description if you want to get started with Untapped, but I'll paste these deck lists. A whole bunch of information will be made available here. We're also going to be looking at a 128-person tournament that took place over the weekend in Standard. I actually was fortunate to do commentary for the top 8, and gameplay of the top 8 is also on my channel if you want to take a look at that. And then lastly, we'll be going to look at some MTGO, Magic the Gathering online leagues. So we're going to spread out. We're going to be taking a look at a bunch of different data sources to find you the best decks currently for the standard format. As we've kind of been mentioning in the last couple of videos, I am on a quest, a journey, a Lord of the Rings saga to get to 10,000 subs by June. And I'm closing in on 8,000. So if you haven't subbed to the channel, it's free, it's easy, helps out the channel, goes a long way. Much appreciated. If you've already subbed, thank you for the support. And as always, liking and commenting also helps the algorithm overlords. But yeah, let's jump into it. So like I said, March 7th through the 14th, Diamond to Mythic rank, 21,000 matches per Untapped. This is best of 3, so a match consists of 2 to 3 games. So keep that in mind in the overall volume of games. And we're going to jump into it. And the top performing deck of the week from the Arena ladder is Esper Midrange, Esper Legends. And this was the list that a lot of the Channel Fireball members brought to the regional championship in Napoli, Italy. And this is kind of an amalgamation, and it was kind of built from what I read to beat up on the Grixis deck. So we're seeing a return of Wedding Announcement in the main board. You still have your kind of Legends package. You have your Skrells, your Denics, your Thalias, Adelins, Rafines, Sheoldreds, with the Plaza of Heroes package. Very, very good mana base. In terms of just the quality of lands, the color lands, fixing stuff like that. Wedding Announcement gives you a number of bodies, insulates you against Invoke Despair, scales your team over multiple turns, provides pseudo card advantage through the ability to attack with 2 creatures, so that provides that advantage there. The other tech card for the matchup was Razorlash Transmogrant. This is a reoccurring card, so it only costs 2 mana to come back from the graveyard as a 4/2, and you can bring it back at instant speed, so your opponent's end step. And that's if your opponent has 4 more non-basics. Most of these 3 color lists, even to some extent the 2 color lists, are skimping on the number of basics. Just looking at this deck in particular, this deck plays no basics. So once they hit line 4, Razorlash is on, and unless you exile it, it's going to keep coming back from the graveyard and putting a lot of pressure on your opponent. In the main board, the only removal is Go for the Throat as a 2-of. There's also a Ludwig Necrogenius. It is a 2-mana 2/3 legend. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you mill a card, and then you can pump a whole bunch of mana, and it becomes a copy of that card from your graveyard. Also plays kind of nicely with the Rafine. So you kind of have that. You got all the dual lands. You'll notice this deck's also on 28 lands. In part because these channel lines, you usually don't see this, it's usually one of these lines. Because there's so many legends, these all become 1 mana kind of spells. So in the early game, it helps you fix your mana. You don't miss line drops. Missing a line drop in standard is quite impactful because people just snowball. But you get Takenuma, bounce, and removal kind of tied into your lands. This also gets around kind of colored protection effects of Skrell, since these are colorless. Sideboard-wise, early creature removal. Enchantment removal, big booty removal. In like the Grixis matchups, Invoke Despair matchups, mono white matchups, like the big mono white midrange, your bigger, more threatening cards. Some Go for the Throats. Lawrence for artifact enchantment removal, good against Grixis, stuff like that. And then mono red, the Selesnya Toxic deck, stuff like that. Anything with like low to the ground creatures, malicious malfunction sweeps those up. So that is Esper Midrange. I'll preface by saying there's a lot of different ways this legend deck can be built. This one is kind of the flavor of the week, the most popular configuration from the kind of biggest tournament stage of the weekend. We then go to Mono Red Aggro. This is another deck that has some variations in terms of how it's being built. 65-66% win rate on this one, 110 games played. And the core of this deck kind of remains the same. You're using aggressively slanted creatures in Swiftspear, Phoenix Chick, Bloodthirsty Adversary, Flashback your instant sorceries, Feldon as kind of an awkward to block for your opponent, otherwise it gives you card advantage, Haste Creature, Squee goes wide as well as comes back from your graveyard, Thundering Raiju to kind of go over the top, put counters, stuff of that nature. What we're seeing kind of new this week is we've seen a trim of a Phoenix Chick and a Feldon for a second, or most of the time they play 2 copies of Strangle, but it's actually the Reckless Impulse that's new this week. Sometimes they're on Shivan Devastator, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're on 4, sometimes they're on 3, but this is a clear concession, just going down a Phoenix Chick for a Reckless Impulse for some more card advantage. Seeing the 3 Mishra's Foundry. I've also seen some of these mono red lists get a little bit greedy and actually play an additional copy of the Myrex in the mana base. So that's 4 colorless lands. So depends on how greedy you want to get with it. You're also a 22 land deck. You need to hit at least double red in this deck. But oftentimes even just having more red sources is beneficial. Your sideboard. Glittering Bolt just as 4 damage removal spell. Bloody Betrayal for big things. AO, Atraxa, Shieldred, just steal their best creature, attack in kind of deal. For the kind of go wide strategy decks, Brotherhood's End. So think potentially the Mirror, Soldiers, the Toxic decks, anything of that nature. Furnace Punisher, it comes in against your Esper Legends, your Grixis deck, your Jund decks, any of the heavy multicolored decks, just doing its job, punishing. Rending Flame, reads kill Shieldred or big creature, and then Jaya's for the more grindy card advantage matchups. We've mentioned Toxic a couple times, and Toxic is up on next. So 61% win rate for this deck here, 130 games, and we're seeing kind of an adaptation of this deck. Looking at the mana base, largely okay. Farmhands could probably go up 1 more copy, I would say. This version is only on a single planes, but you're probably okay. You still have all your duels here. The payoffs with these are just the utility lines. You have Myrex to make tokens, Seed Core to fix your Phyrexian mana for your creatures, which all your creatures are Phyrexian, as well as being a pump effect for your little dorks. And the core of this deck, it is a toxic deck. You're trying to poison your opponent. There is kind of the cheat way of Venerated Rot Priest targeting it with things like Valor stands for protection, Tyvar stand for protection, any of your creatures really, as well as Audacity to give a boost and trample, and then draw a card when they die. Pairing that with, so like Audacity on Jawbone Duelist could be pretty good, push through damage, especially with like a pump. That's kind of a new tech that we're seeing this week. The Valor stands haven't really been featured too prominently either. But we're seeing those, your kind of core package of creatures, Crawling Chorus, Skrull for protection, the Skrull's Hive to make a bunch of tokens, Slaughter, Stinger as your Lord style effect, and the Jawbone Duelist for double strike. So we're actually seeing the kind of change by this package is moving the Annex Sentry to the sideboard. The Sentry is pretty bad against like the Grixis decks, the heavy removal decks, but good against some creature decks, just in terms of removal. Malara for the Mirror, any sort of poison deck, destroy evil enchantments or just bigger creatures. Knockout Blow for mono red, but can also be used against other creature combat. It just gets it's a 1 mana deal 4 attacking creature, gain 2 life for like mono red decks. Touch a Spirit Realm as a protection effect or just catch all removal. You can channel this to get around removal. And then this one's an interesting inclusion. I don't know if I necessarily love this. Having like a copy of Laran, 1 or 2 copies of Laran could be decent somewhere in there. And then Wedding Announcement for the red black X kind of grindier mid-range piles. This just helps you grind advantage. Speaking of red-black midrange piles, so this is Rakdos midrange, but more of an aggressively slanted version that's been picking up popularity. This did pretty well at one of the RCs over the weekend, so it's kind of the bastard love child of mono red and mono black aggros mixed together. So in mono red, you obviously have your Kumanos in there. You're pairing that with like the mono black elements of Tenacious Underdog, Razor Lash, and then you got the mid-range elements of Fable, Graveyard Trespasser, Bloodtithe Harvester kind of mixed in. Just a bunch of 3-power 2-drops. You got removal with Cut Down and Go for the Throat. Then you have Archfiend of Dross, which hasn't seen too much play up to this point. This is usually your Shieldred slot. 4 mana 6/6 flyer, so this thing is going to hit hard and hit hard fast. Enters the battlefield with 4 oil counters. Beginning of your upkeep, remove an oil counter. Then if you don't have any oil counters on it, you lose the game. So this does kind of put your opponent on kill it or be killed. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, they lose 2 life. So even chump blocking gives them some life loss. Invoke Despair is on the top end. And then just kind of a Rakdos. So you got a bunch of duels on the Rakdos side. Your sideboard, for the heavier control, mid-range slanted decks that go a little bit bigger, you have your Duress, Parasitic Grasp, good against soldiers, mono red, just any sort of smaller deck, especially if they have humans, gains you some life. Punishers, as we mentioned in the previous state, your Lilianas for the grindier matchups, Ob for the grindier matchup, and Shieldred against like mono reds or any decks that don't have too much removal, but then just kind of get stonewalled by Shieldred. Then lastly, we have Grixis Midrange. This is 57%. Again, this is another deck that can be built many different ways. You can have Blade Coil Serpent. You can be on varied numbers of Shieldred. We'll see in the Standard League, one of the Grixis deck was running 0 Shieldred. They got 5-0. I didn't know that was possible. But there's a lot of different ways to build this. But the core of the deck itself is pretty much 3 cards. You have Corpse Appraiser, Fable the Mirror Breaker, Bloodtithe Harvester. You fill around the edges there. This version's also on copies of Graveyard Trespasser, Brotherhood's End Main, smattering of removal with Cut Down, Abrade, Go for the Throat, some Make Disappears, Bank Busters. This version's even going as large as Gix Command and Invoke Despair in the main board. The Gix Command's a nice sweeper element that can also provide lifelink and rebuy some of your threats. Your sideboard. It's actually very interesting that this deck's only on a single copy of Bank Buster in the main. Don't know if I love this configuration, because in the grinding matchups, this card goes the distance. Duress, again, for like mirrors, any of the kind of spell-based heavy versions of decks. Abrade, artifacts, and just general removal. Disdainful Stroke negates for kind of your control big matchups. Parasitic Grasp, as we mentioned. Unlicensed Hearse for Graveyard Hate. Brotherhood's End as a sweeper, along with another copy of Gix Command. So generally in matchups where either they're going very wide or they're more aggressive, you want the Gix Command over some number of Invoke Despairs. Then, switching over, we had Slice of Standard Pizzabox Open. This is a tournament series that's run 3 weekends a month. Different formats depend per week, Standard, Explorer, or Historic. And these are best of 3 formats. Varied cash prizes from $100 to close to $300 for the winner. This past weekend, we had over like close to 200 plus people enrolled. Ended up people enroll and then sometimes drop towards, but we got pretty much close to the cap at 128 participants, 122 to 128. And this tournament was actually really fun. I casted, like I said, the top 8. You'll see all the deck lists here. The lone unbeaten in the Swiss rounds, 8 rounds, was mono white midrange. So you can hover over these, see all the lists. But mono black aggro had a really good representation, actually. Mono black midrange aggro, whatever you want to call it. So Grixis was the most represented in terms of volume of games, and they had a 53% win rate. Mono white 59, Esper Legends 56, mono red aggro 43. Selesnya Toxic, 61, and like I said, mono black at 67. Rakdos midrange, we're getting to smaller sample sizes, but Rakdos and Jund had pretty terrible matchups all weekend. Similarly with some of the other decks. You can take a look, you can hover. I'm not going to spoil the top 8s. If you want to catch the coverage, you can check that to see who won in terms of the actual individual, but top 8 was mono white, 2 mono whites, midrange, 3 mono blacks, Selesnya Toxic, Esper Legends, and 2 Esper Legends. We're kind of mixed into there. Like a mono blue almost made it. He's had some like Jeskai control from Sanyo, which is a really cool deck. So a lot of interesting things. There's a 5-color domain deck that was in contention to top 8, but lost the last round, kind of dropping them out. So lots of cool deck lists here if you want to take a look. Then popping over to MTGO. So this is We Will Accept Cookies. Thank you. So again, I'm not going to go through every list, but you can take a look here. So this is from league data. So it's kind of like tournament series where you play 5 rounds. You win like prize packs, stuff like that. This is paid admission, so it's usually a little bit more try hard than the latter since there's a financial cost with playing the games. So like you said, I was saying there's an Esper version, Grixis version, just Corpse Appraiser, Blood Tithe Harvester, playing Invoke, Blue Sun's Twilight in the main, a little bit more interaction, and no copies of Shieldred in the 75. Was this on purpose? Was this because I couldn't find the cards or budget constraints? Don't know, but it got 5-0. We have another copy of, this is kind of like the other version of the Legends deck that has Errata Drabic in it, Ravenman, 4 copies of Toulouse to recycle your connived or discarded cards. So interesting there. This version is actually bringing back our boy Edgar back from the grave, flipped over, and kind of going from there. We had a mono blue list that got 5-0. Just kind of looking mono white mid-range. We have an Atraxa Reanimator deck, so Cruelty of Gix. So this deck's looking to throw an Atraxa into your graveyard through a number of means like blood tokens, Fable the Mirror Breaker, stuff like that, and then bring it back with the 3rd chapter of Cruelty of Gix. Also seeing some copies of Atushi in the main board, which is pretty sweet. Card you don't see too often in the format. So interesting there. This one's also got Toxrill in the sideboard, so it's got all the bangers. The big slug boy. This version of Mono White Midrange is on 3 Elish Norns and a Mondrak. So kind of a cool tokeny themed version of the deck. Another Traxa deck, similar idea. Mono White. So Mono White's been a lot more popular online. We see a Mono Black midrange deck with some underdogs. This is an Angels list. So Mardu Angels we have here. Pretty solid performance. Just kind of bringing back to the old Angels list that we had last season. There is a Golgari fight deck. I repeat, a Golgari fight deck 5-0. Phyrexian Obliterator, Glissa, Armored Scrapgorger, go for the throw, Tail Swipe kind of mixed into there, and an Invoke Despair deck. We have just more mono whites, Soldiers deck, kind of another mid-rangey version of the Legends deck. So you can kind of go down. We have like the more aggressive deck, like the Rakdos Aggro deck. This one's on 4 Elder Dragon Wars, kind of bridging in that respect. A lot of recursive creatures that come in too. So you can take a look at all these and see what kind of jumps out to you as potential other options. But say online, we're seeing a lot more copies of like mono white and Atraxa decks, where we're not seeing that necessarily on the ladder. Last one, this is Naya Legends. Ajar's, actually, this is a 5-color Joda. 5-color Joda is here, another 5-0, which is actually pretty surprising to see Joda place, but there's some cool lists here. Take a look, see if any jump out to you. So with these here, it could be like just a good luck streak that was played out. You know, going 5-0 is in best of 3. It does take some effort. You're not just going to like casually get a 5-0. But if we're looking at sample sizes, obviously it's only 5 games. If we start seeing similar lists or archetypes, stuff like that, but things to try out that aren't kind of the norm in this regard. In any case, going to wrap this one up. Thanks for watching. Like I said, if you can, drop a like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks. We'll catch you next time.